Well, good morning. It is Saturday, May 8th, and we are gathered for our morning devotion time and now study time. We're continuing with Hebrews for Everyone by N.T. Wright, and today's passage is from chapter 1, verses 6 through 14. Again, when God brought the firstborn son into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. In relation to the angels, this is what it says. God makes his angels spirit and his servants flames of fire. In relation to the Son, however, it says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter in uprightness and the scepter for your kingdom. You love justice and hated lawlessness. Therefore God, your God, anointed you with the oil of gladness as superior to your comrades. And again, you established the earth, O Lord, from the beginning, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will be destroyed, but you will remain. All of them will grow old like clothing. You will roll them like a cloak. They will be changed like clothing, but you are the same, and your years will never give out. But to the angels, But to which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a stool at your feet? Must we not say then that they are the servants of the Spirit, sent to act on behalf of those who are inherit salvation? It was Christmas again, and we spent what seemed like a very long time, not just buying presents, but wrapping them up. Half the fun of Christmas morning, after all, is the exciting packages in glittering wrapping with ribbons and bows, all telling you something about how wonderful the present itself would be. But that Christmas, one of the children was so excited by the wrapping and inside the wrapping a beautiful box that she almost ignored the present itself. Indeed, though she seemed pleased in a way with the present, later that day, we found her behind an armchair playing with the box. She was using it as a tiny dollhouse for some of her smaller toys. It worked so well and was, after all, very pretty. She had laid out the wrapping paper around it to be a kind of stage set, a backcloth for the game she was playing. The fact that I couldn't now remember what was in the box itself, the real present, kind of makes the point. Hebrews is anxious that the people it's written to shouldn't make this mistake. They were Jewish Christians, as indeed all the very early Christians were. But this letter seems to be written not in the very earliest period, but perhaps sometimes between 50 and 70 AD, possibly even after that. By that time, some Jewish Christians had got quite used to being part of a family that includes Gentiles. They had accepted that God's purpose, after years of preparation, had now been fully revealed. The wrapping had come off the present, and the present was Jesus himself, God's own unique Son, sent to fulfill everything the law and the prophets had spoken of. They could now move on from the earlier stages of God's purpose and gladly live out the new one which has already been drawn. But for many other Jewish Christians, things weren't as easy. Lots of their family members and friends and neighbors, too, hadn't accepted that Jesus was the Messiah and regarded them as dangerously misguided and disloyal to all that God had said earlier on. All sorts of pressure would be put on them to try to make them go back to where they've been before, to abandon this newfound movement with its strange claims and to take up again a position of living under God's law, the law given through Moses. The law was such a significant thing. Why would you want anything else? After all, it wasn't just given by God, though they would be important enough. It came in a splendid wrapping. It was given to Moses by angels. This is why the long argument of Hebrews, an argument designed to show that you can't go back to an earlier stage of God's purposes, must instead go forward, must press on eagerly from within the new stage to the one that is yet to come. Begins with demonstrations from the Jewish scriptures themselves that the Messiah was always intended by God to be superior to the angels, and hence superior to the law that they brought. The law wasn't fixed for all times, as many Jews thought and still think today. It was part of God's preparation, part of the brilliant and beautiful wrapping in which the ultimate present, God's gift of his own self in the person of the Son, would be contained. This is where the letter is warning against the mistake of playing with the wrapping instead of that which is present itself. There are three things in particular which Hebrews wants to say about the way in which the Messiah is superior to the angels, each of which anticipates fuller statements later on in the letter. After the opening verse 6, the writer quotes Psalm 97, verse 7, to show that God intends the angels to worship the Son. He quotes three more passages about the Messiah to contrast him with the angels who, according to Psalm 104, verse 4, and quoted in verse 7, are servants of God rather than living embodiment of God. First, in verse 8 and 9, the letter quotes Psalm 45, verse 6 and 7. This is a breathtaking passage because it addresses the king as if he can be called God. It speaks of the king in this godlike way, as exercising a sovereign rule through which, as many passages said, should be the case. Upright, justice, and rule of true law are put into effect in the world. One of the great themes of God's future purposes through the Bible is that God longs for real justice. We, who through our newspapers and television are all aware that injustice and wickedness flourish all over the place, could do worse than reflect on this promise. Indeed, God's aim of forgiving the sins of the people, about which this letter has so much to say, is a part of a larger aim, to create a world in which evil has at last no place. At the point of which Psalms, as Hebrew quotes here, is that all of this is happening, but not through the angels, but through the true anointed King, the Messiah. The second passage comes from Psalm 102, verses 25 and 27, and picks up on the forever and ever in the previous quotation. There is coming a time, says the Psalms, when the present world, earth and heaven alike, will be rolled up like a scroll, and a new heaven and a new earth will take place. Hebrews returns to that theme at the end of chapter 12, and much of the letter from here to there is to be understood within this framework. God's preparatory purpose through the law and through the prophets have reached a climax in the Messiah, and the Messiah himself will be the one who will see God's plan of salvation and justice through to the ultimate new age, the age to come, the time of renewed heaven and earth. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The angels are preparing the way, but he is the one whose life and saving rule will last for all eternity. And the third shorter passage comes from Psalm 110, one of the passages which was widely used in the early Christians to interpret the meaning of Jesus' messiahship. Hebrews 2 will come back to this several more times. It speaks of the enthronement of God's true king as God's right hand, and of the sovereign rule which he will exercise until everything that thwarts his purpose of justice and salvation will be defeated. Once again, nothing like this is ever said about the angels. They, Hebrews concludes, are simply servants with a job to do within God's purposes. Once you see who the Son really is and the role that he has intended to play in God's plan, you won't want to go back to anything more. Not many readers today, perhaps, will be tempted to abandon Christianity in favor of some form of Judaism, though this is important for us to understand why that's such an obvious pressure in the early days. But many today, including many in the church, seem dissatisfied with what they have and are eager to expand their spiritual horizon, to include angels and saints and other interesting distractions. Let this letter serve as a warning and an encouragement. Don't start playing with the wrapping instead of the true present. Pay close attention to who Jesus really is, to the role he played and still plays in God's plan in the life of the worship and service to which he and he alone calls each one of us. And so, just to summarize, So he's saying that this next section of chapter 1 is saying that Jesus not only is God, but if you look at the angels and you look at the servants and you look at the prophets, those are characters playing a role, for lack of a better term, characters playing a role in God's purpose that ultimately comes to the end in Jesus as being God's ultimate purpose. Everything else was just kind of led up to that. And he's saying, he uses that present metaphor, is that sometimes we look at the wrappings, we look at the laws, we look at the prophets, we look at the people in the Bible and say they're beautiful and great. But he's saying we need to move on from just the wrapping. We need to open the present and see the gift that is there that was given to us on Christmas, the Christ child. And this is the fulfillment of all the prophets, of all the rule, of all the laws, of everything in the Old Testament, that Jesus was the true Messiah. And so this is crucial, as he stated. The book of Hebrews comes back to this. And, the writer of Hebrews intended us to have that in the back of our mind as we continue our study. So go forth this day into peace and the love of Christ, and have a great day.